Okay, great. Yes. So today we're going to be talking about habits, changing your habits around food. I talk a lot in my work um, around helping people stay on track with healthy eating. I talk a lot about changing your relationship with food, right? That's usually the words I use, changing your relationship with food. So you have a very different relationship with food. But what is your relationship with food? What does that even mean? Well, you could say that your relationship with food is just um, sort of an umbrella term for your collection of habits around food, right? If this is your first time catching one of my live broadcasts, my name is Sarah Best, and I am a nutritionist, but I joke that I'm the nutritionist who never talks about food because my philosophy is really that I believe that for the most part, you kind of already know what you should be eating and not eating. Of course, there's always more to learn in that area, but we already have a good sense of like we should be eating more vegetables and fruits and whole foods and less processed stuff and fast foods and simple sugars and stuff, right? We already kind of know that. You don't need, I believe, you don't need me to tell you what to be eating and not eating. I think that the bigger question is why don't you do what you kind of already know you should be doing, right? Why don't any of us do that? Why is it so hard to stay on track? And so that's really where I come in. The work that I do is all about helping you change your relationship with food, change your habits, make it start feeling a lot more natural and automatic and easy to stay on track so that it's sort of like a no-brainer. It becomes sort of automatic. You literally change who you are in relation to food. You change your relationship with food. So a big piece of that is our habits, right? People talk to me all the time about their habits around nighttime snacking, emotional eating, right? Eating when you're stressed, eating when you're bored, eating when you're sad, overdoing it in social situations, right? Getting caught up at the restaurant or on vacation or when you're out at a party or when you're, you know, having a girls' night with your friends, and just totally overdoing it, making the wrong choices and eating too much, right? So these sort of habits all together, I think, form a big component of your relationship with food. And that's really what I work on changing. Now, before we dive into the secret to changing any habit around food, I want to just talk for a minute about sort of the words we use, because what people usually tell me is that they have a lot of bad habits around food, right? And I think that we have to just be careful about the words we use because words are powerful. And when you start saying that you have a lot of bad habits around food, it sort of naturally follows that you are bad, right? If you keep participating in bad habits, there's like this sense you're carrying with that. There's an energy to that you are bad. And that is a problem, because when you feel like you are stuck in bad habits, and thus there's this underlying belief that you are bad, that you are weak, that you are uncommitted, that you lack discipline, that you are disorganized, that you are lazy, right? All of these things is bubbling under the surface of you saying you have bad habits. What happens when we carry that energy around is we actually trigger more of the not so healthy choices, right? Because you start to feel awful about it all. It feels awful to feel like you're bad. It feels awful to feel like you have no willpower, like you're undisciplined, like you're weak, like you're lazy. That feels horrible. And what we know is because so many of us do have this relationship with food where we equate food with making ourselves feel better, then guess what happens when we make ourselves feel bad, when we label ourselves as having bad habits, as being bad? What do we trigger? We trigger our brains to go in search of something that's going to make us feel good. And what is that? It's not apples and carrot sticks, right? It's sugar, it's carbohydrates, it's all the processed junk that we're trying to get away from. So I just want to preface my little discussion here today about changing habits with just encouraging you to start to notice when you label your habits as bad, when you label yourself as bad, and just start to kind of change the words you use for that, right? It's just a habit. All habits are the same. All habits have the same structure. There's no good habits or bad habits. There may be habits that are serving you better than others, right? There may be habits that are bringing you closer to your goals. There may be habits that are more in alignment with the values that you want to hold for yourself. There may be habits that are more carry more integrity in terms of who you want to be and how you want to show up. And there may be habits that are moving you further away from that. And maybe those are habits that you want to change, but they're not good habits or bad habits. They're all just habits, and they all function the same way in the brain. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how habits work and how we can, once we understand that, how we can break them down and change them so that we have habits that better support the lifestyle we want to create, habits that better support the person we want to become. Okay? So there's 3 components to every habit, all right? And there's a lot of great, this is something that I feel like is very much out there in the zeitgeist right now. There's a lot of books and stuff around habits. So this might not be new to a lot of you, and that's great. It's good to understand the basis of habits so that we can change them. But generally speaking, there's 3 components to any habit, okay? Again, good, bad, whether it's about food or something else. Habits are just a certain way that the brain structures behaviors that you repeat. That's how you create a habit, whether it's a habit about how you tie your shoes, a habit about how you brush your teeth, a habit about how you wash yourself in the shower, or a habit around how you use food when you're stressed. The mechanisms in the brain, the neural pathways in the brain are the same, okay? So 3 pieces to any habit: a cue or a trigger, a routine, and a reward. Okay, so it's important to understand these 3 pieces: the cue or the trigger, the routine, and the reward. All right. So when we're thinking about, let's say we're talking about nighttime snacking. Okay, this is a huge one people ask me about all the time. If you haven't yet picked up my nighttime snacking solution, head over to my website. It's in the free tools section. I have a whole guide on how to get yourself out of nighttime snacking because it's something people ask me about all the time. Totally free. Go ahead to the website, free tools, download it. But let's talk about nighttime snacking because it is literally the number one thing I get asked about, the number one thing I help clients with often. Nighttime snacking, nighttime binging. So let's figure out what the cue or trigger is for that. Well, usually it's a time of day, right? Is when it often happens. What are other things that might be going on at that time? You might be feeling really tired, really exhausted, overwhelmed, depleted, stressed, right? After a long day. So there can be feelings involved in that trigger. There could be other things going on in your house. Maybe it's like when you get the kids to bed, or maybe it's after you've washed the dishes, or maybe when it's a certain TV show comes on, right? So it's important first to identify the trigger or the cue. The routine is the behavior. And in this case, usually when we're trying to break a habit, we know what the routine is. It's the thing we don't want to do anymore. So in this case, it's nighttime snacking. It's going to the cupboard and pawing through and looking for a little something, pulling out the potato chips, going into the freezer, getting the ice cream, pouring the glass of wine. Like that's the routine, right? So you encounter the cue or the trigger, you go into your routine. Then it's important to understand what the reward is. There's always a reward to any habit. Otherwise, you wouldn't keep doing it. Now, sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes it's that you're exhausted, you're depleted, and the treat feels like it's a treat, right? We get into that I deserve it kind of feeling, right? After the day I've had, I deserve this. So sometimes that's the reward. It's this sort of relief from the stress, from the exhaustion, from the feeling that you're just giving and giving and people are just taking and taking. There's like a relief, like you are giving yourself a gift, a treat, like you're nurturing yourself, right? So it's almost like a feeling of love, a gift that you're giving to yourself. It's a weird quasi sense of like self-care almost, right? You kind of, some of you know what you're nodding, I know. And that's, again, when we get into that, I deserve this. If you've ever said that to yourself, then that's probably the reward you're seeking. Sometimes the reward is just familiarity, right? It's just comfort. It's just that this is what we always do. Like maybe your husband and you always watch TV at 8:00 and you always have chips or something, crunchy and salty while you're doing that, right? So it's just there's a comfort, there's a familiarity. Your brain loves the familiar. So sometimes that's just the reward. It's just, this is what we always do at this time. And so to do anything else would feel awkward and uncomfortable. And so the reward is just the familiarity. So the first step to changing any habit is to identify these 3 components for your habit, okay? So start to identify what is the cue or the trigger, What is the routine? That's usually the easy part. And it's the thing you want to change. And what is the reward? What is the payoff? What are you getting from doing this? Okay. Sometimes if you're finding it hard to nail that down, start thinking about not doing it and what comes up for you. Like what would you feel like you're missing? Because otherwise you would just stop doing it. Why are you watching this video? Why is this a frustrating habit, right? If it's not, then just stop doing it. So if stuff comes up for you when you think about not doing it, then you're getting closer to the reward that you're looking for, right? Because you feel like you're going to lose that. You're not going to get that reward. So that can kind of help you zero in on what that reward is. Now, once you've identified those three components, your cue or your trigger, the routine, and the reward, the way to change any habit is not to change all three components, but simply to keep the cue or the trigger, because life is always going to happen, right? Those cues and triggers are always going to come up. We can't really change those. And keep the reward because, again, it's really hard to change that. Your brain sort of wants that reward. It wants that payoff of some kind. The key is to pick a different routine. All right. So keep the cue, keep the trigger. Can't really change that. Can't really change the reward, so keep that. But what is a different routine you can slot into the middle that you can do when you encounter that cue or trigger that will give you the same or a similar payoff, reward, but will serve you better, right? Will not be binging on the couch with potato chips or ice cream or wine, but instead will be something that serves you better, that is healthier, that is actually more effective maybe in getting you the reward. Ironically, often I find that, for example, with nighttime snacking, we are using a routine, we are repeating a routine, the nighttime snacking, the binging on junk food, that is not the most effective way to get the reward that we want, right? I often suggest that, we're trying to put a food-shaped peg into like a self-care, self-love hole. Do you know what I mean? What we really need when we're exhausted and depleted after a long day is some self-care, right? We really need to address the fact that we're feeling exhausted and depleted, and we need to do those activities that actually make us fill our cup, right? Binging on potato chips does not fill your cup. Yes, it gives you an instant spike in dopamine, so you get a sense of it feels good, and so it feels like you're giving yourself a treat. It feels like you're taking care of yourself. It feels like you're giving yourself a gift. But ironically, you're actually doing exactly the opposite, right? And we usually end up feeling worse because then we get mad at ourselves. We're judging ourselves. We feel guilt. We feel shame, right? So we're just piling on. So if we're using the nighttime snacking habit as our example here, we know the cue, the trigger, right? Nighttime, feeling overwhelmed, certain cues in the evening. The routine that we have right now is the binging on the junk food, and the reward we want is to feel like we're filling our cup, to feel not so depleted, to feel appreciated, to feel some self-love. And food is not going to do that, right? You're trying to put a food-shaped hole into a self-love shaped, or a food-shaped peg into a self-love shaped hole. They don't fit. So spend some time thinking about a different routine that would actually much more effectively address and give you the payoff that you're looking for, right? So again, you can kind of brainstorm a list of what these things might be for you. They're going to be different for you than they are for me or for anyone else. But what are the activities? You can probably think of a few just off the top of your head. What are the activities, the things you do that do make you feel like you're filling your cup, like you are connecting with that best version of yourself, that just make you feel like, like you've kind of come home, right? Maybe it's things like yoga, right? Gentle yoga. Maybe it's journaling. Maybe it's playing a guitar. Maybe it's painting. Maybe it's laughing with a friend. Maybe it's hugging your dog. Maybe it's hugging your kids or your partner. Maybe it's just reading a good book with a cup of tea. Maybe it's just getting into your jammies and going to bed earlier, right? Like, start to think about what are those activities that really would give you the reward, the payoff that you're looking for. And that's how you change that habit. And this is transferable. This process we just went through for nighttime snacking, this is transferable into any other habit that you're feeling stuck on, right? Whether it's food or even anything else, the habit structure is the same. There's always going to be a cue or a trigger There's always the routine, which is the habit you're trying to change. And there's always a payoff, a reward. So identify the 3 components for whatever habit you want to change, and then think about how you can change that routine in the middle. What can you do when you're triggered or you encounter that cue? What can you do that will give you the same reward or even more effectively give you that payoff or that reward? And then start to practice doing that. Okay? I hope this was helpful. I hope you will start to think about how you can put this to work in terms of your own habits. Pick one, just pick one habit that you want to start working on. Maybe it's nighttime snacking. Again, if you haven't already, if nighttime snacking is something you really want to get more help with, I have created a whole free guide that's a really simple 3-step process for specifically targeting nighttime snacking, a little bit different than what we talked about here today. But just head over to my website, sarahbest.com. Go to the free tools section. It's right at the top. So grab yourself a copy of that. And, but whatever habit it is, whether it's nighttime snacking or eating when you're stressed or eating when you're bored or overdoing it when you're in social situations or, whatever, follow this, figure out the 3 components to that habit. And it can take some time. So sometimes, again, the routine's obvious. Often the cue and the trigger is reasonably easy to figure out. Sometimes the reward is trickier. So just, be curious, give yourself some time with this, try to identify those components, and then see what you can do about changing that routine to change the entire habit. Okay? All right. Hope this was helpful, guys. Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear how this works for you if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you soon.